Every morning, my husband whispered the same words while handing me a crystal bottle. Drink it all. I made it just for you. For 4 years, I believed that was love. What I didn't know was that those words were the most calculated sentence he ever spoke, because what was inside that bottle wasn't devotion, it was poison. And for 3 weeks, I accidentally gave every drop of it to the wrong woman. When she screamed in front of nearly 300,000 people clawing at her own skin, I didn't panic like everyone else in the room. I went very, very still, because in that moment I finally understood what my husband had been doing to me for 18 months. Thank you for being here with me. Before we continue, drop a quick comment. Have you ever had someone close to you betray your trust? Just yes or no. Your answer might help someone else today. Quick note. This story includes fictional elements to highlight the lesson, but the message is what truly matters. The crystal bottle appeared on my desk every morning at 7:30, and for 4 years I never questioned what devotion actually looked like until it was too late. At 29, I had built Voss Lumiere from a single formula into a $200 million empire, and I believed my marriage was just as flawless. The morning of June 3rd started the way every Monday had started for the past 4 years, with my husband performing ritual in our Century City estate kitchen. Damian Brennan, 36. My husband and chief marketing officer carried the crystal bottle into the kitchen with the precision of a man performing sacred theater. He set it on the marble counter with a soft clink that echoed against the vaulted ceiling. The morning light caught the facets of the glass, scattering rainbows across the white stone. Morning love. He said, his voice warm and practiced. He was already dressed for the office charcoal suit, silver cufflinks I had given him on our 5th anniversary. His dark hair was perfectly combed. His smile was camera-ready. Elena, our housekeeper of 3 years, stood quietly near the door, as she did every morning, the silent witness to domestic theater. She held a dish towel in both hands and watched Damien slice fresh ginger root with the kind of focus most people reserve for surgery. I sat at the breakfast bar with my tablet reviewing the quarterly projections for our Tokyo expansion. The kitchen smelled like espresso and bergamot. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Los Angeles glittered under June's sun. Damien added the ginger to the bottle, then squeezed half a lemon, measured 2 tablespoons of raw honey, and dropped in 3 sprigs of fresh mint from the garden. He filled the bottle with filtered water and shook it exactly 12 times. I had watched this ritual so many times I could have performed it blindfolded. "You work too hard, love," he said, sliding the bottle across the counter toward me. "Drink all of it." I looked up from the tablet and smiled. "Thank you, darling. You always know exactly what I need." It was the same script we had performed for Vanity Fair, for Harper's Bazaar, for the Southern California Business Journal cover story that called him America's most devoted husband. The photographer had captured this exact moment, Damien's hand on the bottle, my smile of gratitude, the morning light painting us both in gold. I took a polite sip. The liquid was cold and sharp, with ginger sweet with honey underneath. I set the bottle down and returned to my tablet. Damien kissed the top of my head. "I have the board meeting at 9. I'll see you at the office." "Drive safe," I said. He left. Elena collected his espresso cup and disappeared into the pantry. I worked for another 20 minutes, then capped the crystal bottle without finishing it, dropped it into my leather tote, and drove downtown to Voss Lumiere headquarters. The 34th floor executive suite smelled like the sample batch of our new autumn line, amber and burnt fig. My assistant had already arranged the morning schedule printout on my desk beside a single white orchid. I set the crystal bottle down next to my computer and opened my email. Crystal Hayes arrived at 9:15. Crystal Hayes, 26, with 4 million followers, waited in my office that morning, complaining about Hollywood's brutal body standards. She was our brand ambassador for the youth market, luminous skin, perfect bone structure, the kind of face that sold 5,000 units in the first hour of a product launch. "Breakfast is water," she said, dropping into the chair across from my desk. Lunch is a salad with no dressing. I'm so dehydrated I could cry. She was wearing athleisure that probably cost more than my housekeeper's monthly salary. Her nails were lacquered the exact shade of our new Rose Nocturne lipstick. I glanced at the crystal bottle sitting beside my keyboard. My stomach had been unsettled all week's stress from the Tokyo negotiations probably. I had barely touched Damien's detox water. "Take it," I said, sliding the bottle across the desk. Crystal's eyes went wide. "Are you serious?" "My stomach's been acting up this week," I said. "I'm not going to drink it." "Oh my God, seriously?" Crystal reached for the bottle like I had offered her something sacred. "Anything your husband makes must be incredible. The Vanity Fair spread I saved that article. The way he talks about taking care of you." She unscrewed the cap and drank. Not a polite sip. She drank half the bottle in 4 long swallows, her throat working her expression blissful. "This is amazing," she said. "What's in it?" "Ginger lemon honey mint," I said. "He makes it fresh every morning." Crystal finished the rest of the bottle and set it down with a satisfied sigh. "You are so lucky. My boyfriend can barely remember to text me back." I smiled. She smiled. We moved on to discuss the campaign strategy for her next fragrance launch. She left at 10. I worked through lunch. At 4 o'clock I realized I had not thought about the crystal bottle once. How long does it take for devotion to calcify into performance? The next morning, Damien made the detox water again. I brought it to the office again. Crystal appeared at 9:15 with the same complaints about her restrictive diet. I slid the bottle across my desk. She drank it. We never discussed it explicitly. It simply became routine. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. 3 weeks passed. Every morning, Damien performed his ritual in the kitchen with Elena watching. Every morning, I carried the crystal bottle to my office. Every morning at 9:15, Crystal drank what was meant for me. We were both smiling at the wrong things for entirely different reasons. I never mentioned it to Damien. He never asked if I was actually drinking his carefully crafted detox blend. At the time, I thought that said something about how busy we both were, 2 people running an empire, too consumed by quarterly projections and campaign launches to notice the small details slipping through the cracks. I thought it was normal. I thought it was fine. 3 weeks later, everything would shatter in front of 280,000 people. 3 weeks after the ritual began, Crystal Hayes started screaming in front of 280,000 people. I was in my office reviewing distribution contracts for our European expansion when Rachel Foster, my executive assistant of 2 years, burst through the door with her tablet raised and her professional composure completely shattered. "You need to see this," she said. She cast the screen to the wall display without waiting for permission. The 70-inch monitor filled with Crystal's live stream. Crystal was in her West Hollywood studio, the same pristine white backdrop she used for every product launch. But instead of holding up a lipstick or demonstrating a skincare routine, she was clawing at her face with both hands, her perfectly manicured nails leaving red streaks down her cheeks. "Something is crawling inside me," Crystal screamed. Her eyes were wild pupils dilated so wide the iris was barely visible. "Under my skin, can you see them? Stay away. Stay away." The viewer count in the corner read 283,000. The comment section was a vertical blur of panic and speculation. Crystal grabbed fistfuls of her own hair and pulled. Strands came loose. She didn't seem to notice. "Get them out," she sobbed. "Please, somebody get them out." The camera shook. Someone off screen was shouting. 2 people in production crew shirts rushed into frame and tried to grab Crystal's arms, but she twisted away with inhuman strength, shrieking about insects burrowing through her muscles. The live stream cut to black. Rachel stood frozen by my desk, her hand over her mouth. I sat very still and watched the blank screen. My hands were folded on the desk in front of me. My breathing was controlled. Inside my chest, something cold and sharp was beginning to take shape. "Should I call someone?" Rachel asked quietly. "No," I said. "Her team will handle it." Rachel hesitated, then nodded and left my office, closing the door behind her with a soft click. I opened my phone and pulled up Crystal's Instagram. The live stream was already gone, but the comments were flooding in. Half were concerned, half were cruel. Someone had already screen recorded the breakdown and posted it to 3 different platforms. I texted Damien. "Did you see Crystal's live stream?" 3 minutes passed, then 5, then my phone rang. "Hey, love," Damien said. His voice was warm and easy, the same voice he used in every interview, every magazine feature, every board meeting. "Just finished the back 9. Incredible weather today. Did you see what happened to Crystal?" I asked. "Oh, that." He paused. I heard birds in the background, the distant sound of a golf cart motor. "Yeah, someone forwarded me the clip. Crazy, right? She probably partied too hard this weekend. You know how these influencer types are." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. She said something was crawling under her skin. I said, "Drugs." Damien said simply, "I've seen it before. The young ones, they think they're invincible and then they end up like this. It's sad, really." His tone was sympathetic. His words were reasonable. But underneath it all, there was something I had never heard before. A flatness, a carefully controlled neutrality that felt rehearsed. "We should send flowers," he said, "to the hospital once we know where they took her. Good for the brand image." "Of course," I said. "I'll be home by 7, Damien said. "Love you." He hung up. I sat in my office as the afternoon light slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, Los Angeles continued its indifferent sprawl. Inside, I replayed Damien's voice in my head. Good for the brand image. Why would a husband's first concern be brand damage when a young woman was tearing at her own skin? I stayed at the office until 11. Then I drove home to the Century City estate parked in the garage and waited until I heard Damien's breathing settle into the deep rhythm of sleep. At midnight, I went to my private formulation laboratory. The lab was on the ground floor, built into what used to be a wine cellar before I renovated it 8 years ago. Stainless steel counters, temperature-controlled storage, a ventilation system that could handle volatile compounds. This was where I had created the original Voss Lumiere signature scent, where I still worked on new formulations when inspiration struck. I unlocked the drawer in my desk where I kept samples for analysis. Yesterday's crystal bottle sat in the back. Untouched, I had brought it home unopened, after telling Crystal my stomach was upset, slipping it into my bag without thinking the way you pocket something you haven't decided what to do with yet. She had looked disappointed but understanding. I set the bottle on the counter under the bright LED task light. For 8 years, I had trained my nose in grass, learning to identify 3,000 individual scent compounds by memory. A master perfumer's nose is more precise than any gas chromatograph, my mentor used to say, if you know how to listen. I unscrewed the cap and inhaled. Top note, bergamot oil, cold-pressed Calabrian, sharp and clean. Second note, pineapple essence, likely synthetic for stability. Heart note, the mineral profile of Evian spring water. Base note. I stopped. There was something else. Something that didn't belong. I closed my eyes and inhaled again, deeper this time, letting the molecules coat my olfactory receptors, letting my brain process the information at a level below conscious thought. The note was there. Cold, chemical, metallic, unmistakable. It was hidden beneath the ginger and honey, masked by the citrus brightness of the bergamot, but once you knew to look for it, it was impossible to ignore. This wasn't a natural compound, it wasn't a supplement, it wasn't a vitamin. This was something synthetic, something engineered, something deliberately concealed. My hands were steady as I pipetted 10 milliliters of the liquid into a glass vial. I sealed it with a plastic cap and labeled it with a black marker, Henderson, Nevada. I stood in my laboratory at 12:45 in the morning, holding a vial of liquid that my husband had made for me every single day for 4 years, and I understood that I was standing at a threshold. On one side was the life I thought I had: a devoted marriage, a thriving empire, a future built on trust. On the other side was whatever truth this vial contained. A master perfumer's nose doesn't lie. Mine was telling me something was inside that bottle that had no business being there. I needed to know exactly what it was before I took a single step in any direction. I packed the vial in a padded case, locked my laboratory, and went upstairs. Damien was still asleep, one arm thrown over the pillow where I should have been lying. I stood in the doorway and watched him breathe. By morning, I would be 2 hours away in Nevada paying cash for answers. I told Damien I had a supplier meeting in Nevada, drove myself paid cash for the hotel, and used a name that wasn't mine on the lab intake form. The drive to Henderson took 2 hours and 17 minutes. I left at 6 in the morning while Damien was still asleep. I texted him from the road, early start. "Call you tonight. Love you." He responded with a heart emoji. The forensic toxicology facility was in an industrial park off Boulder Highway, wedged between a wholesale plumbing supplier and a commercial printing operation. No sign on the door, just a number. DEA accredited meant they processed evidence for federal cases. It also meant they knew how to keep their mouths shut. Dr. Alan Shepard, the intake technician at the Henderson facility, processed my paperwork without asking questions. Cash has that effect. He was in his 50s, balding, wearing latex gloves and a name badge clipped to a white lab coat. "Comprehensive forensic toxicology panel," I said, sliding the vial across the stainless steel counter. "I need synthetic neurotoxin screening. Cash only." He looked at the vial, then at me. 48 hours for full analysis. We'll send encrypted results to the email you listed. I had created the email address that morning using a VPN and a name I pulled from a random obituary. "Thank you," I said. I checked into a motel 6 blocks away. The room smelled like industrial cleaning solution and old carpet. I sat on the bed with my laptop and worked remotely, answering emails, reviewing projections, approving marketing materials. At 7 that evening, I FaceTimed Damien. "Hey, love," he said. He was in our kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. Behind him, I could see the marble counters, the evening light through the windows. "How's the supplier meeting going?" "Productive," I said. "They're showing me the new extraction equipment tomorrow. Should be back by Thursday. Miss you," he said, smiling at the camera. "Miss you too," and I said. We talked for 12 minutes. He told me about his day. I told him fabricated details about the supplier facility. We said, "I love you." We hung up. I sat in the motel room and stared at the wall until the sun went down. The encrypted email arrived 46 hours later at 3 in the afternoon. I opened it on my laptop with my hands perfectly steady. The report was 11 pages long. Most of it was technical language, molecular structures, chain of custody documentation. But page 7 had a summary written in plain English. Sample contains highly advanced synthetic acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. Compound structure indicates pharmaceutical-grade engineering. Dosage calibrated to micro-level precision. If ingested daily for 4 to 6 weeks, subject would experience complete permanent loss of cognitive behavioral control. I read the words 3 times. This was not an accident. This was not contamination. This was deliberate weaponization. Someone had engineered this compound specifically to destroy cognition while evading standard medical detection. Crystal had consumed it for exactly 22 days. I folded the report, placed it in the inside pocket of my vest, and checked out of the motel. I had cried only once before this in my adult life, the day my father died. I had promised myself that day it would be the last time I let grief move faster than strategy. I pressed my hand against the paper in my vest pocket and thought of him the entire drive back. He had taught me that trust is a circle you draw carefully, and conviction is a line you hold without compromise. When I was 16, he had made me memorize a phone number. He said if I ever needed help beyond what money or lawyers could provide, I should call that number and say his name. I had never used it. Until now. I arrived home Thursday evening. Damien was in the living room watching a documentary about Formula One racing. He stood up when I walked in and kissed me on the cheek. "How was the trip?" he asked. "Productive," I said. "The equipment is impressive." I think we should move forward with the contract. Good, he said. I'll have legal draw up the paperwork. I unpacked. We had dinner. We watched television. We went to bed. For 4 days I performed flawless normalcy. I woke at 6. I drank the coffee Elena made. I left for the office at 7:30. Damien made the detox water every morning, and every morning I accepted it with a smile. I told him my stomach was still bothering me. I poured the contents down the drain in my private bathroom and rinsed the bottle thoroughly. I watched him, not as a wife, as a stranger. I watched his eyes when he handed me the bottle. He was not looking at my face. He was looking at the fluid level calculating consumption tracking execution timeline. On Sunday evening, we had dinner on the terrace. The city spread out below us, glittering and indifferent. Damien poured wine. We talked about the upcoming anniversary gala. You've been quiet lately, he said. Gala prep, I said. 47 international vendors and a 300-item technical checklist. You'll pull it off, he said. You always do. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. How long does it take for a marriage to transform from sanctuary into execution chamber? That night, I waited until his breathing steadied into the deep rhythm of sleep. Then I rose from bed, stepped into the hallway, and pulled out my phone. The number was still in my memory, exactly where my father had placed it 18 years ago. I dialed. Vincent Pike, 62, and retired from 22 years at the FBI, answered on the first ring, which told me he still kept his old habits. It's Serena Voss, I said. A pause. Then, your father's daughter. Tell me what you need. The next morning, I told Damien I had an early supplier call and left the house before 7, driving to Koreatown instead. Vincent Pike's office was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The hallway smelled like old carpet and someone's morning coffee. No receptionist, no corporate polish. Just a door with a brass nameplate that said Pike Consulting and a deadbolt that clicked open when I knocked. The office was small and cluttered, filing cabinets against one wall, a desk covered in paperwork, a window overlooking a parking lot. Vincent stood when I entered. He was tall, lean, with silver hair, and the kind of face that had spent 22 years reading lies for a living. Your father once saved my career, Vincent said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I owe him more than I can ever repay. Tell me what you need, and I'll tell you if it's legally possible. I sat down and presented my case in 12 minutes. I showed him the toxicology report. I told him about Crystal's live stream breakdown. I described Damien's unnatural calm when I called him from the office. I explained that I needed to know who was helping him, how long this had been planned, and what they intended to do next. Vincent listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. 3 parameters, he said. 24/7 surveillance on your husband, offshore financial trace for hidden accounts, audio documentation through federal authorization. Agent Cross is already building the financial case. Once we loop in the FBI, their Title 18 wiretap authority covers the recording. We document everything and hand it to federal investigators. They handle chain of custody. How long show? I asked. Give me 72 hours, Vincent said. I gave him 48. The encrypted file arrived 2 days later at 11 at night while I was in bed next to Damien. My phone buzzed. I checked the notification. Email from an address I didn't recognize with a subject line that was just a string of numbers. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and opened the file on my phone. 14 photographs, high resolution, timestamps in the bottom right corner. July 4th, 6:47 a.m., Montage, Beverly Hills. Damien in casual clothes walking out of the lobby, a woman beside him, her hand in his. 6:48 a.m. Damien opening the passenger door of his car. 6:49 a.m. The woman sliding into the seat, his hand on her lower back. 6:52 a.m. Damien driving, the woman's hand on his thigh. There were 10 more photographs. Different angles, different timestamps, all from the same morning. 14 photographs. I stared at them for a long time. My hands did not shake, but something inside me went very, very quiet. In every single one of them, the woman beside my husband was someone I recognized instantly. Diane Shaw, 35. Chief of Toxicology at Cedars-Sinai, and my best friend since college called me the next afternoon to suggest dinner with the warm voice I had trusted for a decade. "You need to decompress, honey," Diane said over the phone. "Come over Friday, I'll cook." "I'd love that," I said. 7:30, she asked. "Perfect," I said. I arrived at Diane's Silver Lake penthouse at exactly 7:30 on Friday evening. She opened the door wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She hugged me. I hugged her back. Come in," she said. "I made that pasta thing you like." I stepped through the threshold and froze. Not because of what I saw, because of what I smelled. Beneath the sandalwood candles burning on the sideboard, beneath the garlic and olive oil from the kitchen, beneath the faint trace of Diane's usual perfume, there was another scent, soulmate. The custom fragrance I had created for Damien on our 3rd anniversary, amber and cedar, and something darker underneath. A chemical fingerprint I had engineered personally, a formula I had never shared with anyone, a scent that existed in exactly one place in the entire world, the crystal atomizer on Damien's dresser. I had spent 8 years training my nose in grass. I could identify 3,000 compounds by memory. I could detect concentrations at parts per million. There was no mistaking it. "You okay?" Diane asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "You look pale." "Long day," I said. We ate dinner on her terrace, overlooking the Silver Lake Reservoir. The food was excellent. The conversation was easy. Diane asked about the gala preparations. I told her about the vendor negotiations and the technical setup. She told me about a difficult case at the hospital, a patient with unexplained neurological symptoms that stumped the entire department. "Sounds complicated," I said. "It is," Diane said. "Sometimes the most obvious answer is the one everyone misses." She poured more wine. We talked about a documentary she'd watched. We talked about her mother's upcoming birthday. We talked about everything except the fact that she was sleeping with my husband and helping him poison me. How many years does it take to engineer a friendship cold enough to poison? At 10 o'clock, I thanked her for dinner. She walked me to the door and hugged me again. "You looked tired tonight," she said. "Take care of yourself, okay?" "Always," I said. I drove home with the windows down and the radio off. The city blurred past, red lights, white lights, the endless sprawl of Los Angeles at night. I had created Soulmate in my private laboratory over the course of 3 months. I had blended the bass notes personally. I had calibrated the proportions by hand. I had bottled it in a custom atomizer and given it to Damien with a card that said, "For you alone. For you alone." Standing in Diane's living room, I understood for the first time what it had actually become, the olfactory signature of a 10-year infiltration. My husband and my best friend had been planning this long enough to share a signature scent, long enough to coordinate their movements with surgical precision, long enough to believe they had already won. They were wrong. Before I could dismantle their plan, I needed to build an unbreakable legal shield. The morning after Diane's dinner, before Damien was awake, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Vincent II, to a psychiatrist whose name I'd found through a referral chain that could not be traced back to anyone connected to Diane Shaw. The office was in Santa Monica, in a medical building 2 blocks from the ocean. No connection to Cedars-Sinai, no overlap with Diane's professional network, no possibility of interference. Dr. Patricia Owens, a prominent independent psychiatrist with 30 years of forensic experience, looked over her spectacles and questioned the clinical urgency with the sharp precision of someone who had testified in court more times than I could count. "You're asking for a comprehensive evaluation on a Saturday morning," she said. "Walk-ins for this level of assessment are highly unusual." We were in her consultation room. The walls were pale gray. The furniture was modern and minimal. Through the window, I could see palm trees swaying in the morning breeze. I require a full psychiatric evaluation, I said. MMPI-2, Battery Cognitive Assessment, Neurological Screening, and a formalized legal report. I need it completed today. Dr. Owens set down her pen. May I ask why the urgency? Because someone is about to file an ex parte petition claiming I lack the cognitive capacity to manage my own empire. I said, I require an unassailable contemporaneous medical record that states otherwise. She studied me for a long moment. I held her gaze. This will take approximately 3 hours, she said. Are you prepared for that level of assessment? Yes, I said. She nodded and stood. Let's begin. For the next 3 hours, I answered 678 questions, true or false, agree or disagree. Rate your level of anxiety on a scale from 1 to 10. Describe your sleep patterns. Explain your decision-making process. Repeat this sequence of numbers backward. Solve this puzzle. Identify the pattern. Dr. Owens administered the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. She tested my executive function. She screened for depression, anxiety, cognitive decline, memory impairment, delusional thinking, paranoid ideation. I passed everything. At noon, she closed her laptop and removed her spectacles. Your results are definitive, she said. Flawless cognitive health. Zero indication of anxiety disorders or neurological deficits. Your executive function tests are in the 98th percentile. Your memory recall is exceptional. Under California Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 5150, an involuntary hold requires concrete medical evidence of danger to self or others, or gravely disabled status. This document completely neutralizes any fraudulent affidavit claiming incompetence. She printed the report on official letterhead. 12 pages. Every test result documented. Every score recorded. A final summary that concluded with clinical certainty. Subject demonstrates absolute legal competence and capacity to manage personal and financial affairs. She signed it, dated it, stamped it with her medical license number. I'll send the certified copy to whatever address you provide, Dr. Owens said. And I'll be available for expert testimony if needed. Thank you, I said. I left the building with the original report in a sealed envelope. I sat in my car in the parking structure and held it in both hands. How many people in history have had to scientifically prove their own sanity before someone could legally slap the crazy label on them? I drove back to Century City. Damien's car was gone. He'd texted that he was playing golf with clients. I went to my private laboratory and unlocked the safe I kept for sensitive formulation documents. I placed the psychiatric report inside next to the toxicology analysis from Henderson. 2 pieces of paper, both of them proof that I was being systematically destroyed by people I had loved. I locked the safe and went upstairs to my home office. I scanned the report and sent the digital copy to my corporate counsel with a subject line that said, "For safekeeping. Do not acknowledge receipt." He responded 2 minutes later with a single period. I sat at my desk and looked out the window at the city below, Los Angeles in the afternoon sun, endless and indifferent. I had just spent 3 hours proving I was mentally competent. I had paid cash for a certified document that stated in clinical language that my mind was sound, my memory was intact, my judgment was flawless. I had just legally bulletproofed my own mind. The conservatorship petition was coming. I knew it the way you know a storm is coming when the air pressure drops. Damien and Diane had spent months, maybe years, engineering this. The poison, the public ritual, the medical credentials, the photography of devotion. Everything designed to construct a narrative the brilliant CEO, whose cognitive function was failing the devoted husband stepping in to save her company, the trusted best friend providing medical testimony. They were going to paint me as incompetent. They were going to take my empire. They were going to lock me away in some facility while they liquidated everything my father and I had built. But now I had proof, time-stamped, certified, legally unbreakable. They thought they were 3 steps ahead. They were wrong. My phone buzzed. A text from Vincent. Financial report ready. Where do you want to meet? I looked at the clock. 2:15 in the afternoon. I texted back your office. 30 minutes. I changed into business clothes. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I looked calm, professional, completely in control. I looked like someone who had never been poisoned, someone who had never discovered her husband in 14 surveillance photographs, someone who had never smelled betrayal in her best friend's living room. I looked exactly like what I needed to be. I locked the original report in my private safe and sent the digital copy to my corporate counsel. Now I needed to understand exactly what I was bulletproofing it against and who had built the weapon in the first place. That same afternoon, Vincent's financial report would rewrite everything I thought I understood about my marriage. That same afternoon, sitting in my car in the Santa Monica parking structure, I read Vincent's first full financial report, and what I found inside rewrote everything I thought I understood about my marriage. The document was 43 pages. Most of it was bank records, wire transfer logs, corporate filings pulled from offshore registries that required specialized access. But page 17 had the information that mattered. Shaw Brennan Capital LLC, incorporated in the Cayman Islands, March 2023. I read the date 3 times. March 2023, 18 months before the gala. 3 months before Damien ever brought me that first crystal bottle. This was not a crime of passion. This was not a husband who had slowly lost his moral compass. This was a corporate acquisition strategy planned with the precision of a leveraged buyout. The next pages detailed the financial architecture, the offshore shell company, the New York clearing bank that processed the transfers, the account structure designed to obscure beneficial ownership. Vincent had highlighted the total in yellow $47 million already siphoned from accounts I thought were secure. $47 million. The conservatorship would grant Damien legal proxy to liquidate 51% of my shares in Voss Lumiere, control of the company, control of the assets, control of everything my father had built, and I had grown into an empire. But the money was already moving. The infrastructure was already built. The trap was already set. I scrolled to the next section. Vincent had traced the corporate registration documents. Shaw Brennan Capital LLC required 2 authorized signatories. Diane Shaw, primary. Damien Brennan, secondary. 18 months. She had been planning this since before our last anniversary. Since before I made her a perfume called Soulmate. Diane was not the accomplice. Diane was the architect. Damien was merely the man holding the bottle. I sat in my car and stared through the windshield at the concrete wall. Someone's car alarm was going off 3 levels down. The sound echoed through the structure. I had known Diane for 14 years. College roommates. Best friends through graduate school, through my father's death, through my wedding. She had been my maid of honor. I had helped her move into her first apartment. We had celebrated every major milestone in each other's lives. For 18 months, she had been systematically engineering my destruction. I folded the report and placed it in my bag. Then I drove home. The performance began Sunday morning. Subtle cognitive decline, not dramatic collapse. Nothing that would raise medical alarm bells or trigger immediate intervention. Just enough to feed their narrative. At breakfast, I set my spoon down mid-sentence and stared at the wall for 7 seconds. Damien looked up from his tablet. "You okay, love?" I blinked. "Sorry, what?" "You just stopped talking," he said. "Did I?" I picked up my spoon again. "I was thinking about the vendor contracts. There's so much to track. Maybe you should take a break," he said. His voice was gentle, concerned. "The gala has you stressed." "I'm fine," I said. Monday evening, I asked him to repeat a question he had just asked. "What did you say?" I asked. "I asked if you wanted to go out for dinner," he said, watching me carefully. "Oh," I said. "Sorry, my mind was somewhere else." Tuesday afternoon, I left my phone in the refrigerator. Damien found it 20 minutes later when he went to get water. "Love," he said, holding up the phone. This was next to the milk. I looked at it, then at him. I don't remember putting it there. Are you sure you're okay? He asked. I rubbed my temples. Just overwhelmed. The gala. It'll pass after July 28th. He sat down next to me at the kitchen counter. That's why I spoke to Diane. She thinks a comprehensive evaluation before the gala would be best, just to make sure everything is okay. I looked at him. His face was open, caring, the concerned husband. I don't need an evaluation, I said. It's just stress. But if it's affecting your memory, after the gala, I said firmly. If I'm still having issues after the gala, I'll see someone, but not before. I need to focus. He studied me for a moment. Then he nodded. Okay. After the gala. He thought he was being patient. He thought he was giving me space. He thought his timeline was secure. Poison me until the gala, file the conservatorship petition immediately after, present Diane's medical evaluation as evidence of cognitive decline. He had no idea that I had already seen a psychiatrist, that I had already secured legal proof of competence, that every symptom he was observing was calculated theater designed to feed him exactly the data he expected to see. He thought he was watching me come apart at the seams. He had no idea he was watching a performance. Every morning, Damien made the detox water. Every morning, I accepted it with a grateful smile. Every morning, I brought it to work and poured it down the drain in my private bathroom. Every night, I performed the script Diane had written. Confusion, forgetfulness, momentary blanks. Nothing dramatic, just enough to confirm what they already believed. Every night after Damien's breathing steadied into sleep, I went to the master bathroom and emptied the crystal bottle he kept on his dresser. The one with Soulmate, the perfume I had made for him. I poured it down the sink and watched it disappear. By Wednesday, he had stopped checking if I actually drank the detox water. He assumed I was consuming it. He assumed the neurotoxin was doing its work. He assumed the timeline was progressing exactly as planned. He was wrong about all of it. But I needed him to keep believing he was right. Just a little longer. He thought his script was running flawlessly: the gradual decline, the concerned husband, the inevitable evaluation. I needed him to keep believing that just a little longer. The harder part was performing for Diane, and that appointment was coming. Within 48 hours, I would walk into Diane's clinic wearing Vincent's hidden camera. 2 days after I began performing symptoms for Damien, Diane called with an invitation that sounded exactly like what I had been waiting for: a routine health checkup between best friends. Come by the office Wednesday morning, Diane said over the phone. Her voice was warm, casual. You mentioned feeling overwhelmed. Let me run some basic tests. Blood pressure, cognitive baseline, just to rule out anything physical. You don't have to do that, I said. I want to, she said. That's what friends are for. Okay, I said. Wednesday morning. I met Vincent in his Koreatown office Tuesday evening. He handed me a small box containing a button the size of a dime. Micro camera, he said. HD video, 8-hour battery. Pin it to your blazer. The FBI has authorized this recording as part of the federal investigation. Agent Cross signed off this morning. You're walking in as a cooperating witness. Everything captured is admissible under federal evidence rules. What if she sees it? I asked. She won't, Vincent said. It looks exactly like the other buttons. I arrived at Cedars-Sinai Wednesday morning at 9. Diane's clinical suite was on the 8th floor, a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The reception area was empty. Diane met me at the door. Come in, honey, she said, hugging me. The camera was recording. She led me into the examination room and ran through a series of neurological tests. Follow my finger with your eyes. Touch your nose, then my finger. Walk in a straight line. Count backward from 100 by sevens. I performed flawlessly, because I was flawless. After 20 minutes, Diane sat down at her desk and pulled up my file on her computer. Everything looks good, she said. Blood pressure is normal. Neurological responses are within expected parameters. That's a relief, I said. She smiled. Then she pulled a multi-page document from a drawer and slid it across the desk. Just routine compliance, honey, she said. Sign here so I can keep your medical files current with the hospital network. I looked down at the document. Cedars Sinai Medical Center letterhead, 6 pages, dense paragraphs of medical terminology and consent language. I picked it up and began reading, slowly. Page 1, Standard Privacy Consent under HIPAA. Page 2, Authorization to share records with primary care physician. Page 3, buried in the middle of a paragraph about diagnostic findings. Patient acknowledges symptoms consistent with early onset cognitive decline, including memory lapses, spatial confusion, and executive function impairment. Patient understands these symptoms may require ongoing monitoring and potential intervention. Not anxiety, not stress, permanent decline. I read the clause twice. The camera was recording every word on the page from my angle. The camera was recording Diane's face as she waited, saying, nothing, explaining nothing. Of course, I said. I signed every page. Diane filed the document in a folder and stood. You're taking care of yourself, right? Getting enough sleep. Trying, I said. The gala is in 18 days. I know, she said. After the gala, we'll do a full workup. Just to be thorough. Thank you, I said. I hugged her. She hugged me back. I left her office with the camera still recording. She thought she had trapped me. She had no idea she'd just given me a federal case. That afternoon, I went to the 3rd floor Wing B, the isolated recovery wing, the place they put patients who needed psychiatric observation after medical trauma. Crystal Hayes was in room 314. I knocked. A nurse opened the door, checked my visitor clearance, and let me in. Crystal was sitting on the bed in a hospital gown, staring at the wall. She looked thinner than I remembered. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup, no performance. She looked up when I entered. Her eyes went wide. I'm not here to hurt you, I said. She didn't say anything. I closed the door and sat in the chair by the window. I am not here to fight you, Crystal, I said. I am here because you were systematically poisoned and you deserve to look at the evidence. I pulled out my phone and opened the Henderson toxicology report. I turned the screen toward her. She stared at it. Then she started crying. I saw something, she whispered. Back in February. I didn't understand what it was at the time. I was too afraid to ask. Too afraid to believe what I thought I'd seen. Tell me what you did know, I said. She told me everything. Damien had approached her 4 months ago. April. He said his marriage was over. He said he was filing for divorce after the anniversary gala. He said they could be together openly once the legal paperwork was finalized. She believed him. She hadn't fully understood what she'd witnessed with Diane. She didn't know about Shaw Brennan Capital or the conservatorship plan. She had been too frightened and too invested in believing Damien's promises to connect the pieces she had seen. She just knew that the man she was sleeping with made her a drink every morning that tasted like summer and made her feel like she was disappearing from the inside out. The baby, she whispered. I don't know what any of this chemical stuff means for the baby. When did you find out you were pregnant? I asked. After the breakdown, she said. They ran tests here. 8 weeks. I did the math. June. Right in the middle of the poisoning. I've arranged a meeting with the federal prosecutor's office. I said. The FBI has been investigating the financial crimes. This crosses state lines, which means it's federal jurisdiction. They're prepared to offer you full immunity from any conspiracy charges in exchange for your testimony. You'll tell them everything Damien told you. Every date. Every conversation. Every promise he made. Why would you help me? Crystal asked. Because you're a victim, I said. And because your testimony will put him in prison for 15 years. She stared at me. Tears were streaming down her face. Tell them every single date, I said. That is all you have to do. She nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. I stood up. The federal prosecutor's office will contact you within 48 hours. A lawyer named Vincent Pike will be with you during the interview. He works for me, but he'll make sure you're protected. Thank you, she said. I walked to the door. I'm sorry, Crystal said behind me, for all of it. I didn't turn around. So am I said. She was still crying when I walked out. I didn't look back. There were 8 more things I needed to do before the end of that week. By morning, the FBI would call from Washington with news that would change everything. 2 days later, on a Friday morning, I was reviewing the gala seating chart when my desk phone rang with a Washington, D.C. area code I didn't recognize. I answered, "Serena Voss." "Mrs. Voss, this is Special Agent Nathaniel Cross calling from the FBI Financial Crimes Division in Washington," a voice said, professional, direct. "Do you have time to speak privately?" I closed my office door. "Yes," I said. "We have been actively monitoring Shaw Brennan Capital LLC for approximately 6 months," he said. "We have reason to believe corporate capital from Voss Lumiere is being stripped through offshore accounts and laundered via correspondent banking relationships. The New York clearing bank route you're using triggered federal wire fraud jurisdiction under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. I sat down at my desk. "How long have you been investigating?" I asked. "Since January," Agent Cross said. "The account activity patterns flagged our automated monitoring systems. We've been building a case for interstate wire fraud and money laundering." January. 6 months before I ever detected the metallic note in the Detox water. "I need to meet with you," I said. "I was hoping you would say that," Agent Cross said. "We can arrange a secure location." "I will make myself fully available tomorrow morning at 7, Agent Cross," I said. "And I happen to possess certified forensic toxicology data that will render your financial asset stripping case significantly more absolute." There was a pause. "Toxicology," he said. "They weren't just stealing my company," I said. "They were poisoning me to do it." Another pause. Longer this time. "Tomorrow morning," Agent Cross said. "7 a.m. I'll send you the address." He hung up. I sat at my desk and looked out the window at downtown Los Angeles. The city spread out below me, glass and steel and endless sprawl. The FBI had been watching before I ever smelled the poison. 2 currents, same target. 2 separate investigations screaming toward the same point. I just needed to ensure they collided at the exact right moment. That evening, Helen Brennan arrived at my door. Helen Brennan, 64 and 20 years on the federal bench before her retirement, stood on my doorstep holding a casserole dish and wearing the expression of a judge who had been told troubling evidence. "May I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She walked into the foyer and set the casserole on the entry table. Later, I would understand the terrible irony that Damien had grown up watching his mother dismantle federal conspiracies from the bench and had used exactly that education to design one he believed she would never suspect him capable of. He had bet on her blind spot. He had miscalculated. "Damien asked me to come," Helen said. "He's worried about you. He says you've been forgetting things, having trouble concentrating. He thinks you need to see someone." We stood in the foyer. Through the windows, the sun was setting over the city. "Would you like to sit down?" I asked. "Yes," she said. I led her to the formal living room. We sat across from each other, Helen on the sofa, me in the armchair. "I have something to show you," I said. I walked to my study and returned with 4 documents in a leather portfolio. I sat back down and placed them on the coffee table between us. "Before you look at these," I said, "I need you to understand that what you're about to read will change everything, and I need you to read all of it before you speak." Helen looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. I laid out the first document. The Henderson Toxicology Report. 11 pages. Synthetic acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. Pharmaceutical-grade engineering. 4 to 6 weeks to permanent cognitive destruction. Helen read it slowly. Her face didn't change. I laid out the second document. 14 surveillance photographs. Damien and Diane exiting the Montage Beverly Hills, hand in hand. 6:47 a.m. July 4th. Helen stared at the photographs. I laid out the third document. Shaw Brennan Capital LLC Incorporation Papers. Cayman Islands. March 2023. Diane Shaw primary signatory. Damien Brennan secondary. Helen's hand moved to her mouth. I laid out the fourth document, the psychiatric conservatorship petition, pre-drafted. Legal boilerplate with blank signature lines, filed electronically with Los Angeles County Superior Court. Pending submission. Damien's name typed at the bottom. Helen read every line. When she finished, she set the papers down and looked at me. One tear fell down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. How long have you known? She asked. 3 weeks, I said. She nodded slowly. Then she stood and walked to the window. She stared out at the city for a full minute without speaking. Shh, show me the financial routing sheets, Helen said. Her voice returned to iron judicial authority. I showed her everything. Vincent's forensic accounting, the wire transfer logs, the correspondent banking chain, the New York clearing bank that had triggered federal jurisdiction. We sat in my living room for 2 hours while I walked her through every piece of evidence: the detox water ritual, Crystal's breakdown, the micro-camera footage from Diane's clinic, the immunity agreement, the FBI investigation. When I finished, Helen sat back on the sofa. He is my biological son, Serena, she said quietly, but you are my daughter in truth. She reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. I did not spend 20 years on a federal bench to treat justice as an optional luxury, she said. Not even when the cost of it tears my own name apart. I had spent 2 decades watching her sentence people for crimes like these. Now she was sitting in my living room looking at photographs of her own son. What do you need from me? Helen asked. Federal warrants, I said. You still have connections in Washington. I need them expedited. I need the arrests to happen at the gala in front of 500 witnesses and 3 national networks. Helen looked at me. Public execution. Public truth, I said. She nodded. I'll make the calls. She stood. I walked her to the door. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, Helen said. This is going to destroy him, and it's going to destroy me watching it happen. I know, I said. She picked up the casserole from the entry table and handed it to me. Chicken and rice, she said. Eat something. Then she walked out into the evening. She had spent 2 decades on a federal bench. Now she would use every connection she still had to bring her son to justice. Some mothers shield their children. Others teach them that actions have consequences even when the lesson destroys them both. By morning, I would learn just how deep Diane's betrayal truly went. After Helen left, I sat alone in my lab for a long time. Vincent had sent a second document while I was still talking with her, and I opened it at 11 o'clock at night under the workbench light. The file was labeled Strategic Assessment March 2023. I read the date twice. March 2023, 18 months ago. The document was a planning blueprint. 6 pages. Legal boilerplate mixed with financial projections and timeline estimates. It outlined the probability of seizing conservatorship guardianship via California Probate Code Section 1800. It detailed the requirements for demonstrating incapacity. It calculated the timeline needed to establish a pattern of cognitive decline sufficient to satisfy a judge. At the bottom of page 62 signatures. Damien Brennan, Diane Shaw. March 15, 2023. I sat at my workbench and stared at the date. March 2023. 3 months later, June 2023, we had celebrated our 4th anniversary. I had spent 2 months creating a custom perfume for Damien. Soulmate. Amber and cedar and something darker underneath. A scent that existed nowhere else in the world. A chemical fingerprint I had engineered personally as a declaration of permanence. I remembered the night I gave it to him. We had dinner on the terrace, the city glittering below. I handed him the crystal atomizer wrapped in black silk. He had held it up to the light. You made this for me. Only for you, I said. No one else will ever wear this scent. He had kissed me. You're the only person who truly knows me, Serena. The planning document had been signed and filed for 3 months when I gave him that perfume. While I distilled bergamot and cedarwood. While I calibrated proportions by hand. While I spent 60 hours in my laboratory creating something I believed was love. He was calculating the exact number of weeks needed to lock me in an asylum. I sat with that knowledge for a long time. The workbench light cast sharp shadows across the document. Outside the window, Los Angeles was dark except for scattered lights across the hills. 10 years of friendship, 3 months of signed conspiracy, 2 months of me creating a perfume I believed was love. I folded the document and placed it in the safe with all the others. Then I went upstairs and lay down in bed next to my husband. He was asleep. His breathing was deep and even. I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. Sunday morning, Vincent called at 7:45. "There's a third account structure," he said without preamble. "Ilara Holdings, drawing 8% off every transaction that moves through Shaw Brennan Capital." I was in the kitchen making coffee. Damien was still asleep upstairs. "Who owns it?" I asked. "Beneficial owner Margaret Shaw, 71, Naples, Florida," Vincent said. "Diane's mother." I set down the coffee pot. "Diane's mother," I repeated. "She's been routing the skimmed capital through complex domestic trusts," Vincent said. "The money disappears into her estate structure, completely insulated from Shaw Brennan's corporate liability. If the conspiracy collapses, Diane walks away with millions that nobody can trace back to the criminal activity." "She was planning to betray Damien," I said. "From the beginning," Vincent confirmed. "He thought they were partners. But Diane engineered an independent exit strategy. She was always going to vanish with the money and leave him holding the federal charges." I poured my coffee and walked to the window. The morning was bright and clear. The city spread out below. "How much?" I asked. "Conservative estimate 12 million already moved through Ilara Holdings. Another 15 million staged to transfer once the conservatorship executed. $27 million. Diane's personal extraction fund hidden behind her mother's name. I've uploaded the full asset trace to Agent Cross," Vincent said. "The FBI has everything now: the offshore accounts, the correspondent banking chain, the domestic trust structure, and the beneficial ownership documentation. They have enough to prosecute everyone involved." "Everyone?" I said. "Damien, Diane, and Margaret Shaw," Vincent confirmed. "Federal conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, the works." I thought about Helen Brennan, sitting in my living room, reading the evidence, one tear falling down her cheek, choosing justice over her son. And I thought about Margaret Shaw in Naples, Florida, 71 years old, letting her daughter route millions through her estate, becoming the financial shield for attempted murder. Two biological mothers on opposite coordinates of a tragedy, one building a shield, one building a sword. "What happens now?" I asked. "Agent Cross is coordinating with the Los Angeles field office," Vincent said. "They're preparing federal warrants, arrest warrants for Damien and Diane, search warrants for Cedars-Sinai Shaw Brennan Capital's registered agent and your husband's vehicle. Asset seizure orders for every account we've identified." "Timeline?" I asked. "They want to execute at the gala," Vincent said. "Maximum visibility, maximum evidence collection. They'll have agents positioned as catering staff and security. When you give the signal, they move." I looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Diane was waking up, checking her phone, making coffee, believing she had won. Somewhere out there, her mother was sitting in Naples, Florida, believing the money was safe. Nowhere in their calculations had they accounted for one variable that I would find out before they executed: that I would build a counter case, that I would turn their own conspiracy into evidence. "How long until the gala?" I asked. 9 days, Vincent said. "July 28th. 9 days. The chessboard was vastly larger than I'd originally calculated, but now I finally had the complete picture: every player, every dollar, every lie. The FBI had the financial architecture, I had the poison, and the gala was 2 weeks away. Two mothers. One chose to shield her daughter's crimes, the other chose to condemn her son. The difference between them would matter very soon. "Thank you, Vincent," I said. 9 days, he said. "Then it's over." He hung up. I stood in my kitchen and watched the sun rise over Los Angeles. Upstairs, my husband was still sleeping. In 2 weeks, his world would end in front of 500 people. Now the clock would start ticking in a different direction toward confrontation. The following Monday, the first week of July, Damien began what I can only describe as the next phase of a script that had been written long before I ever suspected it existed. We were having breakfast on the terrace. The morning was clear and warm. He was reading something on his tablet. I was pretending to review vendor contracts on my laptop. He set down his tablet and looked at me. "Baby, you completely missed our private dinner reservation last Thursday," he said. His voice was gentle, concerned. "And yesterday, you referred to the Meridian Pacific distribution account by an entirely incorrect tracking name." I looked up from my laptop. "Did I?" "You called it Phoenix instead of Meridian," he said, in front of 3 executives. I remembered both incidents perfectly, because I had orchestrated both of them. The dinner reservation I had deliberately failed to acknowledge. The account name I had deliberately switched during a conference call watching the executives exchange glances. "I'm sorry," I said. "Just exhausted. The gala pressure. The second it wraps on July 28th, my head will clear." Damien reached across the table and took my hand. "That's exactly why I reached out to Diane," he said. "She strongly advises a comprehensive baseline check before the gala, just to rule out anything medical." "Before the gala," I said. "That's less than 2 weeks away. I don't have time." "Which is why it needs to happen now," he said. His hand tightened slightly on mine. "If something is wrong, we need to know. If nothing is wrong, we'll have that documented and you can stop worrying." I pulled my hand back slowly. "The morning after the gala," I said. "I promise. First thing. But I cannot add one more variable to the next 13 days. I'm managing 47 international vendors and a technical setup that took 6 months to coordinate." Damien studied my face. "Okay," he said finally. "The morning after." He went back to his tablet. I went back to my laptop. But I knew exactly what he was thinking. He was thinking July 29th, one day after the gala. Perfect timing to file the conservatorship petition while the decline is fresh in everyone's mind. Perfect timing to present Diane's medical evaluation. Perfect timing to take control. He thought he was tightening the noose. He was actually helping me choose the exact right moment. Every symptom he was meticulously logging, every missed reservation, every wrong name, every moment of manufactured confusion was data I had deliberately fed him. He was building a case on false evidence, and when the FBI arrested him in front of 500 people, those same fabricated symptoms would demonstrate premeditation. He had documented his own conspiracy. He thought time was entirely on his side. He was wrong. Wednesday afternoon, I was in a meeting with the European distributors when my phone buzzed with a text from Vincent Emergency. "Call from stairwell." I excused myself, walked down the hall, and pushed through the door into the emergency stairwell. The concrete walls echoed with the hum of the building's ventilation system. I called Vincent. "The federal team is moving," he said, without preamble. "The combination of offshore structural layering plus domestic wire fraud is precisely the engine they needed. Agent Cross has assembled a task force. They're treating this as a multi-jurisdictional conspiracy." "Warrants?" I asked. "Being expedited through Helen's former colleagues on the district bench," Vincent said. "Arrest warrants for Damien and Diane. Search warrants for Cedars-Sinai Shaw Brennan Capital's registered agent, your husband's vehicle, and Diane's residence. Asset seizure orders for every account structure we've identified: Shaw Brennan Capital, Elara Holdings, and Margaret Shaw's domestic trust network." I leaned against the concrete wall. The stairwell was cold. "Margaret Shaw," I said. "Diane's mother will be named as a co-conspirator." Vincent confirmed. "The FBI has her bank records, the trust documents, the wire transfer logs showing 8% of every stolen dollar flowing into her Naples estate. She's 71 years old, and she's going to federal prison. 2 mothers. Helen Brennan had sat in my living room and read evidence against her son. She had cried 1 tear. Then she had called her former colleagues and expedited the warrants that would destroy him. Margaret Shaw had built a financial labyrinth to hide her daughter's crimes. She had accepted millions in laundered money. She had become the shield that would let Diane escape. One building a sword, one building a shield. Timeline, I asked. Execution at the gala, Vincent said. July 28th, approximately 9 p.m. You give the signal. FBI moves in. Arrests happen in front of 500 witnesses and 3 national networks broadcasting live. 11 days, I said. 11 days, Vincent confirmed. Everything is converging. Federal warrants, your toxicology evidence, Crystal's immunity testimony, Diane's fraudulent medical forms captured on video, the offshore financial architecture. All of it pointing to the same moment. 2 currents, one federal, one personal, screaming toward the same fixed point in time. What about Damien? I asked. Is he escalating? We're monitoring his communications, Vincent said. Nothing unusual yet. He's still following the original timeline. File conservatorship the day after the gala. Present medical evidence. Take control of the company. He thinks he has 2 more weeks of setup time. He doesn't, I said. No, Vincent agreed. He doesn't. I stood in the stairwell and listened to the building breathe around me. Somewhere above, my executive team was waiting for me to return to the conference room. Somewhere in the city, Damien was at a golf course or a client meeting, believing his plan was running perfectly. Somewhere in Naples, Margaret Shaw was sitting in her estate, believing the money was safe. None of them knew the trap was closing. 2 mothers, I said quietly. One building a shield, one building a sword. The difference between them would define everything. 11 days, Vincent said. Then it's over. I hung up and stood in the stairwell for another minute. Then I went back to my office and returned to the conference call. The European distributors were discussing shipping logistics. I smiled and nodded and made notes on my tablet. 11 days. The FBI had their warrants. Helen had her resolve. Vincent had his surveillance. I had my evidence. Damien and Diane had their timeline. We were all racing toward the same Sunday evening, and only one side knew the trap was closing from both directions. But 9 days before the gala, Damien would say 2 words that would force everything to accelerate. 9 days before the gala, on a Sunday evening with rain beating against the windows, Damien came home from what he claimed was a late meeting, but his shoes were completely dry. I was in the formal living room with the lights off, looking out at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The rain blurred the view into abstract streaks of light. He walked in and found me standing there. "Hey," he said. "What are you doing in the dark?" "Just thinking," I said. "How was your meeting?" "Good," he said. "Productive." He sat down on the sofa. I stayed at the window. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. I turned to face him. The room was dim, lit only by the city glow filtering through the rain-streaked glass. "Diane wants to move the schedule up," he said. "She strongly feels we should execute the clinical evaluation this week, well before the gala night." "This week," I said. "That's less than 7 days away." "I know," he said, "but she's concerned that if we wait until after the gala, the timing won't be optimal." I walked slowly across the room and sat in the armchair facing him. "Why is there suddenly a rush?" I asked. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. His face was earnest, concerned. "She insists the longer we delay the filing," he said, "the more difficult it becomes." The filing. Not the health check, not the treatment, not the evaluation. The filing. The sterile language of a probate attorney, not a worried husband. I stared at him for 3 seconds. "Okay," I said quietly. He looked surprised. "Okay. If Diane thinks it's medically necessary to move the schedule up, then we should do what she recommends," I said. "When does she want me to come in?" "Wednesday morning," he said. 9 a.m. "Wednesday," I repeated. 4 days from now." "Yes," he said. He was watching me carefully. "The filing." He said it out loud. To my face. The sterile language of a probate attorney, not a worried husband. "All right," I said. "Wednesday morning. 9 a.m. I'll be there. He stood up and came over to me. He put his hand on my shoulder. Thank you, he said. I know this is hard, but we're doing this because we love you. I know, I said. He kissed the top of my head and went upstairs. I sat in the dark living room for 5 more minutes. Then I took out my phone and called Vincent. He answered on the first ring. They are accelerating their timeline, I said without preamble. Damien just told me Diane wants to execute the clinical evaluation Wednesday morning, 4 days from now. Before I explain what happened after those 2 words, if you're still with me, comment A, if you think I should have confronted him right there, or B, if staying silent was smarter, and add 1 reason why in 5 to 10 words. Quick note: some details ahead are dramatized to convey the emotional weight. The lesson is, what matters? Why the acceleration? Vincent asked. He used the word filing, I said. Not health check, not evaluation, filing. The probate court language slipped out completely unguarded. There was a pause. He's getting impatient, Vincent said. Or nervous, I said. Either way, we need to lock everything down now. I require every single piece of evidence locked and certified before Saturday the 27th. We have exactly 24 hours between preparation and execution. Saturday the 27th, Vincent repeated. The day before the gala. Yes, I said. The FBI warrants need to be finalized. Crystal's immunity paperwork needs to be filed. The medical board notices need to be prepared. Helen's judicial authorization needs to be documented. Every surveillance file needs to be encrypted and backed up. Every financial document needs to be certified. I need the complete operational grid locked by Saturday night. That's a 48-hour window, Vincent said. I know, I said. Can you do it? Agent Cross is already coordinating with the Los Angeles field office, Vincent said. They have tactical teams ready to position. Helen has confirmed the warrant signatures. The medical board has prepared suspension notices for Diane under California BPC Section 2220. Crystal is ready to testify. Everything is staged. Then stage it faster, I said. Lock the grid by Saturday. Execute Sunday evening at the gala. No room for deviation. Understood, Vincent said. I hung up and sat in the dark living room. Upstairs I could hear water running. Damien was taking a shower, getting ready for bed. Believing he had just successfully accelerated his timeline, believing he had forced my hand. He had no idea he had just given me the exact deadline I needed. The filing. 2 words that exposed everything. Not medical care, not health concern, not therapeutic intervention. Legal proceedings, probate court, conservatorship petitions. The vocabulary of someone seizing control, not someone providing care. I stood up and walked back to the window. The rain was still falling. The city lights blurred into streaks and halos. 9 days until the gala, 4 days until Diane's trap, 24 hours between final preparation and execution. Every piece had to land perfectly. The FBI would position tactical teams as catering staff and security personnel. Agent Cross would coordinate arrests from a mobile command center. Helen would provide judicial authorization for federal warrants. The medical board would serve suspension notices. Vincent would control surveillance feeds. Crystal would provide live testimony if needed. And I would stand on that stage in front of 500 people and 3 national networks and tell the truth. But first, I had to survive Wednesday morning at Diane's clinic. I had to walk into her examination room knowing she was trying to manufacture evidence of incompetence. I had to perform symptoms convincing enough to satisfy her clinical checklist while maintaining enough control to document her fraud. 4 days. I went upstairs. Damien was already in bed reading something on his tablet. You okay? He asked when I came in. Just tired, I said. Wednesday will be fine, he said. Diane will take care of everything. I know, I said. I got into bed and turned off the light. In the dark, I lay next to my husband and listened to him breathe. 24 hours. Saturday the 27th to lock the grid. Sunday the 28th to spring the trap. 1 week remained, and every single hour of it would be a performance neither side could afford to break. By Monday morning, the operational architecture of the gala tribunal would begin taking shape. The next morning, I left the house early and drove to Koreatown. Helen Brennan joined by encrypted video call from her home in Pasadena, and Vincent had coffee ready for two. We sat in Vincent's office. Helen's face filled the laptop screen. Her expression was composed, judicial. "Walk me through it," she said. I laid out the complete operational architecture in 20 minutes. The Beverly Hilton Grand Ballroom, 500 guests, 3 national networks broadcasting live. 9:15 p.m. Sunday evening, July 28th. Damien would take the microphone for his anniversary speech. Midway through, I would give the signal. The FBI would enter with federal warrants. Agent Nathaniel Cross leading tactical teams positioned as catering staff. Arrests executed in full view of cameras. The medical board would serve formal notice under Business and Professions Code Section 2220, immediate suspension of Diane Shaw's medical license for gross negligence. The venue's master LED wall would display the forensic evidence package, toxicology reports, surveillance photographs, Cayman Incorporation documents, wire transfer logs, audio-video recordings from Diane's clinic, and the Beverly Hilton's automated misting system would be rerouted to flood the ballroom with Soulmate, the bespoke perfume I had created for Damien, the scent that existed nowhere else in the world. The master environmental engineering team at the Beverly Hilton has been fully briefed, Vincent said. The integrated misting system will be rerouted and ready to fire the moment you issue the audio cue. Helen was quiet for a moment. "You're weaponizing a perfume," she said. "Yes," I said. "The perfume you made for your anniversary," she said. "Yes," I said. She nodded slowly. "I understand. I will personally facilitate the expedited federal warrants through my former judicial colleagues on the district bench," Helen said. "Give me 48 hours. 3 forces," Vincent said. "Federal law enforcement, state medical board, your evidence. 1 moment. Sunday evening at 9:15. I looked at Helen's face on the screen. "My son is going to prison," she said quietly. "For a very long time." "I know," I said. "And I'm the one expediting the warrants," she said. "He made his choices," Helen said. "Now he lives with them. 1 week. 7 days to make sure every piece landed exactly where it needed to." The call ended. I drove back to Century City. Damien was already gone when I got home. I went to my office and worked. Vendor contracts, seating charts, technical specifications. I performed normalcy. Tuesday at 2 in the morning, I was still awake in my laboratory when an encrypted email arrived from Vincent. Subject line: Final Historical Audit. The document was 63 pages. Page 12 had the detail that rewrote everything. Diane Shaw. Enrolled. Advanced Polymer Chemistry Seminar. Spring semester 2015. Teaching assistant Serena Voss. I read it 3 times. Spring 2015. 9 years ago. I was 20 years old, teaching my first graduate seminar as a doctoral candidate. Diane had been 26, a second-year medical student. She had enrolled in my chemistry seminar as an elective. That was where we met. I had always believed it was chance. But Vincent's audit showed something else. Diane had requested a transfer into that specific seminar. She had dropped another elective to make room. She had submitted paperwork citing academic interest in polymer synthesis. She had enrolled in my class deliberately. I scrolled to the next section. Vincent had pulled my dissertation data. My 2018 PhD thesis on acetylcholinesterase inhibitor synthesis. My 2020 postdoctoral work on molecular carrier systems. Every piece of research I had published. Diane had read all of it. She had used my own work, my polymer research, my molecular data to engineer the poison that would destroy me. She had customized it to hide in bergamot carrier medium because she knew my olfactory training would mask the compound in citrus notes. She didn't target me because she grew to envy my success. She targeted me in 2015 because she calculated exactly who I was going to become. 10 years of shared secrets. 10 years of calculated clinical investment. I sat in my laboratory at 2 in the morning and stared at the document. Every coffee, every late-night conversation, every birthday dinner, every time she had listened to me talk about my father's death or my marriage or my fears. She had been collecting data. I gave myself 30 seconds to grieve that. Then I went back to work. Because the only answer to 10 years of lies is to not waste a single minute of whatever truth you have left. I closed Vincent's audit and opened the formulation file I had started 3 months ago. Awakening. The perfume I had been developing since May. Not for Damien. Not for the company. For myself. Top notes, white bergamot and pink pepper. Bright and sharp and unafraid. Heart notes, jasmine, absolute and blackcurrant. Complex and defiant. Base notes, deep patchouli and cedarwood after rain. Rooted and permanent and impossible to erase. I had been working on the proportions for weeks. Tonight I finalized them. I mixed the compounds with precision. I calibrated the balance. I tested the dry down on my wrist. The scent was perfect. I bottled it in a crystal atomizer and labeled it with black ink Awakening, July 23, 2024. Then I sat at my workbench and cried. Not loud, not dramatic. Just silent tears running down my face while I pressed both hands against the cool stainless steel counter. I cried for the friendship I thought I had. I cried for the decade of memories that were now revealed as performance. I cried for the version of myself who had believed love and loyalty were real. 30 seconds. That was all I allowed myself to feel what I had lost. Then I dried my face, picked up my pen, and finished the formula I had started 3 months ago. The perfume was called Awakening, and it was finally complete. By Thursday, Diane would demand my immediate institutionalization. The call came 96 hours before the gala at precisely 9:17 on a Wednesday morning. Diane's voice was different this time. No pretense of warmth, no fake concern threading through her syllables. Just clinical coldness, the kind you hear from someone who has already decided your fate. I need you to come in tomorrow morning, Diane said. 10 a.m. Cedars-Sinai. I was at my desk reviewing the final gala technical specifications. I set down my pen. Come in for what? I asked. Voluntary admission, she said. Psychiatric observation, 72 hours. I said nothing. Your court date is scheduled 3 weeks out, Diane continued. Voluntary commitment shows insight. It demonstrates you're taking your cognitive health seriously. It will help your case significantly. Why before the gala? I asked. Because the gala is exactly why, she said. 500 guests, 3 national networks, high-stress environment. If you have a public episode, it will destroy any chance of a favorable ruling. We need you stabilized before Sunday. I listened to her outline my imprisonment like she was reading a grocery list. All right, I said. There was a pause. All right, she repeated. I'll be there at 10, I said. The silence that followed told me everything she had expected a fight. Good, Diane said finally. I'll have the paperwork ready. She hung up. I sat at my desk and looked out at the city. 48 hours until the gala. 24 hours until Diane tried to lock me away. She wanted me committed before Sunday evening. She wanted me in a psychiatric ward while Damien stood on that stage and announced the conservatorship. She wanted me unable to speak, unable to defend myself, unable to expose them. This was the final move before checkmate. Have you ever agreed to something so monstrous that your compliance itself became a kind of power? Thursday morning at 10, I arrived at Cedars-Sinai. Diane was waiting in a private consultation room on the 8th floor. There was a man with her Dr. Klein, a tired-looking administrator with wire-rimmed glasses, who clearly processed these voluntary admission forms a dozen times a week. Thank you for coming, Diane said. She gestured to the chair across from the desk. I sat down. The micro-camera necklace Vincent had given me was hidden in plain sight, a simple silver pendant that recorded everything in high definition. Dr. Klein slid a stack of papers across the desk. Standard voluntary admission forms, he said. You'll need to initial each page and sign the final consent. I picked up the pen and began reading, slowly. Page 1, Acknowledgement of Voluntary Status. Page 2, Consent to Psychiatric Evaluation. Page 3, Authorization for 72-hour hold. Page 4, Waiver of Right to Refuse Treatment. I signed my name 17 times while my necklace camera captured every page, every clause, every flicker of triumph in Diane's eyes. When I finished, Dr. Klein collected the papers and stood. "You'll report to intake tomorrow morning," he said. "Friday at 8 a.m. "Actually," Diane said, "we're going to move that to Monday, after the gala." Dr. Klein looked confused. "I thought the whole point was change of plan," Diane said smoothly. "The paperwork is filed. That's what matters. Monday intake will be fine." Dr. Klein shrugged and left the room. Diane leaned back in her chair and smiled. "See you at the gala tomorrow night," she said quietly. "I'm wearing emerald." I understood then. The papers were never meant to lock me up. They were meant to prove I was unstable enough to need locking up. Signed confession of incompetence. Legal ammunition for the conservatorship hearing. She never intended to keep me hospitalized. She just needed my signature on documents that said I was crazy. "See you there," I said. I left Cedars-Sinai and drove home. Friday evening, I stood in my laboratory and tested Awakening on my wrist. The scent opened with white bergamot, bright and unafraid. The heart notes bloomed into jasmine and blackcurrant, complex and defiant. The base settled into patchouli and cedarwood, rooted and impossible to erase. Perfect. I went to my study and drafted a letter. Sealed envelope. Addressed to Vincent's attorney contact. Instructions: if I disappear, if I fail to make contact within 72 hours of the gala, open this letter and deliver the contents to Agent Nathaniel Cross at the FBI. I placed it in my desk drawer. Then I went to my bedroom and opened the closet. The crimson silk dress hung on a padded hanger. I had ordered it 3 weeks ago. Floor length, sleeveless, the color of blood and victory. I tried it on and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like someone who had already won. I changed into pajamas, turned off the lights, and got into bed. At midnight, I closed my eyes. I slept 4 hours, dreamless. I woke at 4 in the morning on Saturday, July 27th, 28 hours before the gala. My apartment was still dark. My phone had no messages. The city beyond my window was silent in that particular way. Cities are silent just before dawn, not peaceful, but waiting. I rose from bed and walked to the closet where the crimson dress hung like a declaration of war. I had spent 3 months building my case, 2 months gathering evidence, 10 days perfecting a perfume that would mark the exact moment of my resurrection. Tonight, in a ballroom filled with 500 people who thought they were celebrating Voss Lumiere's 50th anniversary, my husband was going to learn what it costs to try to bury someone who refused to stay dead. I touched the red silk one more time. Then I went to make my coffee and wait for the night to come. The ballroom was empty when I arrived at 4 o'clock, and I had never seen anything more beautiful. Sunday, July 28th. The Beverly Hilton Grand Ballroom. 500 chairs arranged in perfect rows, crystal chandeliers catching the afternoon light. The stage at the far end with a podium and microphone. Empty. Waiting. I walked the perimeter slowly. Hidden cameras in the floral arrangements. I counted 6. Vincent's team had positioned them yesterday during setup, disguised as decorative elements in the centerpieces. High-definition video, wide-angle lenses, every angle of the room covered. The LED wall behind the stage, 70 inches, connected to the master server under the technical booth. Vincent had uploaded the complete forensic evidence package last night. Toxicology reports, surveillance photographs, wire transfer logs, Cayman Incorporation documents, audio-video recordings from Diane's clinic. Everything ready to display on my signal. The ceiling misting system. I looked up at the network of nozzles built into the architectural framework. Environmental engineering, designed to disperse ambient fragrance during events. Vincent's team had rerouted it yesterday. Now it was connected to a single reservoir, 1 scent, ready to flood the room on my audio cue. I walked to the stage and tested the microphone. The sound system was live. My voice echoed through the empty ballroom. I turned it off and stood at the podium looking out at 500 empty chairs. In 4 hours they would all be filled. Vincent arrived at 5 o'clock. He was wearing a dark suit. Professional. Unremarkable. He looked like any other event coordinator. "Everything is in place," he said quietly. 4 exits covered. FBI tactical teams positioned as catering staff and security. Medical board confirmed in seats C12 and C13. Helen Brennan is carrying the federal warrant in her purse. "And Crystal?" I asked. "Green room," Vincent said. "She's ready, are you?" I looked at him. "Yes," I said. He nodded and left. I stayed in the ballroom for another hour. I walked the rows of chairs. I checked the sight lines from every angle. I confirmed the camera positions. I verified the LED wall connection. Have you ever stood in a room knowing that in 4 hours everything inside it will detonate? At 6:30 I left to get dressed. I returned at 7:40 wearing the crimson silk dress, floor length, sleeveless, the color of blood and victory. The ballroom was transformed. Lights dimmed to elegant ambiance, floral arrangements glowing under pin spots, the LED wall displaying the Voss Lumiere logo in silver against black. Guests were beginning to arrive. I stood near the entrance and watched them file in. Gowns and tuxedos, jewelry catching the light, laughter and conversation filling the space. 3 national business networks setting up their broadcast equipment along the back wall. Cameras on tripods. Technicians running cables. At 7:50 Damien found me. "You look stunning tonight," he whispered, his hand settling on my lower back. Possessive, confident. "This is our night." He guided me through the entrance. His hand never left my back. We moved through the crowd together, greeting guests, accepting congratulations, performing the role of devoted couple celebrating 50 years of corporate success. Across the room I saw Diane. She was wearing emerald velvet, sleeveless, her dark hair pulled back. She was talking to someone from the board, but her eyes found mine across the ballroom. She smiled. Damien followed my gaze and saw her. Something passed between them, a glance, a confirmation, a shared triumph. Diane walked past us a moment later. "The emerald suits me, don't you think?" she said quietly. "Beautiful," I said. She continued toward her seat. 3 months. 3 months to get to this moment. By 8 o'clock, all 500 guests were seated. The cameras went live. Red lights appeared on the network equipment. The ballroom settled into expectant silence. Damien squeezed my hand. "Time for the speech," he said. He released my arm and walked toward the stage. I stayed at the edge of the ballroom near the technical booth. My beaded clutch rested against my hip. Inside it, the remote control for the misting system. 1 button. 1 signal. That was all it would take. I watched Damien climb the 3 steps to the stage. His movements were confident, practiced. He had rehearsed this speech for weeks. The devoted husband, the concerned caretaker. The man stepping up to save his wife's company from her own cognitive decline. He thought this was his moment. He had no idea. I scanned the room. Seats C12 and C13. 2 men in dark suits. Medical board investigators. Vincent had confirmed their credentials yesterday. They were holding suspension notices for Diane under California Business and Professions Code Section 2220. 4 exits. FBI tactical teams positioned. Agent Nathaniel Cross was somewhere in the catering staff. Federal warrants ready to execute. Helen Brennan sat 3 rows from the front. Gray suit. Composed expression. Her purse rested on her lap. Inside it, judicial authorization for immediate arrest. The mother who had chosen justice over her son. The green room door at the side of the ballroom. Crystal Hayes was behind it. 7 months pregnant. Testimony notes in her hands. The mistress who would become the prosecution's star witness. Everything was in place. He touched my back. I let him. Damien reached the podium. He adjusted the microphone. The room went completely silent. 500 faces turned toward the stage, 3 network cameras broadcasting live, every element positioned, every weapon loaded, every truth ready to surface. Damien looked out at the audience and smiled. He thought he was about to announce the conservatorship. He thought he was about to take control of my empire. He thought the psychiatric admission papers I had signed Thursday were the final proof of my incompetence. He was wrong about all of it. Damien released my arm and walked toward the stage, his shoulders squared with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. The cameras went live. 500 faces turned toward the podium. I stood in my crimson dress at the edge of the ballroom, one hand resting on the misting system remote in my beaded clutch, and watched my husband reach for the microphone that would destroy him. His speech was about to become my testimony. His first words were perfect, exactly the kind of lie that sounds like love. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Damien said into the microphone. His voice was warm, confident. For 50 years, Voss Fragrances has been more than a company. It has been a family. And tonight we celebrate not just our history, but the extraordinary woman who built this empire from a single formula into something that touches lives across the world. The audience smiled. A few people clapped. I stood at the edge of the ballroom and watched my husband perform. My wife Serena built this empire with her hands and her mind, Damien continued. And I have been privileged to stand beside her every step. She is the most brilliant woman I have ever known, a chemist, a leader, a visionary, the heart of everything we do here. More applause, heads nodding, people looking at me with warmth and admiration. He practiced this, every word, every pause. When we met 10 years ago, Damien said, I knew I was meeting someone special. But I had no idea I was meeting someone who would change not just my life, but the lives of millions of people around the world. Serena doesn't just create perfume, she creates experiences, memories. She captures something intangible and makes it real. The audience was rapt. Diane sat 3 rows from the front in her emerald dress, watching with barely concealed triumph. She knew what was coming next. I knew what was coming next. The entire room knew we were celebrating an anniversary. They had no idea they were about to witness an execution. I want to share a story, Damien said. 5 years ago, Serena was working on a new formula. She spent 6 months in her laboratory testing compounds, adjusting proportions. She was obsessed with getting it exactly right. I would find her at 2 in the morning, surrounded by test strips and notebooks, completely absorbed. And when she finally perfected that formula, it became our best-selling fragrance of the decade. That's who she is. That's what she does. She doesn't accept anything less than perfection. The audience was smiling, warm, receptive. Damien had established credibility. He had made them love me. Now he was going to make them pity me. However, Damien said, his tone shifting, the warmth draining from his voice replaced by something somber, heavy. I must share something difficult tonight. The ballroom went quiet. For the past several months, Damien said, Serena has been privately facing severe health challenges. Memory lapses, confusion about details she would normally recall instantly, erratic decisions that don't align with her usual strategic thinking. His voice cracked, fake emotion threading through every syllable. It breaks my heart, he said. But I can no longer stand by and watch the woman I love struggle alone. She needs help. She needs support. And she needs to temporarily step back from the day-to-day leadership of this company. For her safety. For her health. For the future of Voss Lumiere. How does a man describe his wife's incompetence to 500 people while pretending it breaks his heart? Diane leaned forward in her seat. Her eyes were bright, eager. Damien took a breath, preparing for the final sentence, the word that would change everything. Which is why, he said, I am announcing tonight that I will be filing for emergency. I caught Vincent's eye across the room. I nodded once. Vincent moved. The microphone went dead. Damien's voice cut off mid-word, the syllable con hanging in the air like a confession he would never finish. The ballroom lights dimmed. Not completely. Just enough to shift the atmosphere. Enough to make people look up confused, wondering if this was part of the presentation. The ceiling misting system activated. A soft mechanical hiss, barely audible, but I heard it. I had been listening for it. The scent began to disperse through the room, subtle at first, then stronger. Damien stood at the podium tapping the microphone. "Hello," he said. But his voice didn't carry. The audio system was dead. He looked toward the technical booth, confused, then annoyed. The audience began to murmur, people shifting in their seats, turning to each other. What happened? Is everything okay? Is this part of the program? I stayed at the edge of the ballroom. My hand released the remote in my clutch. The first phase was complete. Damien tried the microphone again. Nothing. He looked out at the audience with an expression that was supposed to convey apologetic confusion, but I could see the flash of anger underneath. His carefully orchestrated moment was fracturing. Diane was sitting very still in her emerald dress. Her smile had frozen. She was watching the stage with an expression I recognized, the beginning of realization that something was wrong. The misting system continued its soft dispersal, the scent filling the ballroom. Amber and cedar and something darker underneath. Intimate, unmistakable, soulmate. The perfume I had created for Damien on our 3rd anniversary. The scent that existed nowhere else in the world. The chemical fingerprint of a marriage that had been a lie from the beginning. People in the audience were starting to notice, turning to each other, commenting on the fragrance, some of them recognizing it. Some of them confused about why it was being deployed now during this moment of supposed technical difficulty. Damien gave up on the microphone and started to walk off the stage. That was when I began moving toward him. I walked through the rows of seats. The guests turned to look at me. The woman in the crimson dress. The CEO, whose husband had just declared her incompetent in front of 500 people and 3 national networks. I climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Damien saw me coming and stopped. "The microphone's dead," he said, loud enough for the front rows to hear but not the whole room. "Technical problem. We'll have to—" I walked past him to the podium. Vincent had killed Damien's microphone, but mine was live. I looked out at the audience. 500 faces, 3 network cameras. The LED wall behind me displaying the Voss Lumiere logo. Not for long. Vincent hit the environmental override. Damien's microphone went dead mid-word, the syllable "con" hanging in the air like a confession he would never finish. The ballroom lights dimmed. The ceiling misting system activated with a soft mechanical hiss that only I recognized as the sound of my resurrection. Now it was my turn to speak. The scent that filled the ballroom was the one I had created for my husband on our 1st anniversary, and watching him recognize it was the most satisfying moment of my life. Soulmate. The perfume I had crafted in the lab on our 2nd floor, blending bergamot and amber and sandalwood, until I found the exact combination that made his eyes close when he pulled me close. The scent I had poured into custom bottles with our initials engraved on the glass. The fragrance that had been ours alone. Until tonight when it became the weapon that would destroy him. The misting system dispersed it through every corner of the grand ballroom. 500 guests inhaled it with confused expressions, but only 2 people in the room understood what it meant. I watched Damien's face drain to ash white as the scent reached him. He knew that fragrance. He wore it every day. But he also knew it existed nowhere else in the world, which meant the only way it was flooding this ballroom right now was if I had put it here. His hand went to his throat. His eyes found mine across the stage, and I saw the exact moment he understood. At table 1, Diane Shaw's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against her plate. The LED wall behind me blazed to life, flooding the ballroom with cold blue light. I lifted the microphone. My voice carried through the sound system Vincent had reprogrammed, clear and steady and utterly calm. For 18 months, my husband and my best friend have been poisoning me. The ballroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. I let the chaos build for exactly 3 seconds before I continued. The evidence is behind me, Watch carefully. The first slide filled the LED wall. Surveillance photos from Café Nouveau, time-stamped and geotagged. Damien and Diane at a corner table, their heads bent together, his hand covering hers. The dates ran chronologically. January 2023, March 2023, June 2023. 30 seconds of damning intimacy. The second slide replaced it. Audio waveforms and video frames from the AV trap I had set in my own bedroom. Diane's voice emerged from the speakers. She's getting worse. The tremors are constant now. Damien's reply, good. Dr. Carson says another month, maybe 2, then we file. I watched 500 faces turn toward my husband. The third slide loaded. Financial records from Grand Cayman transaction logs showing systematic transfers from Voss Industries accounts to shell companies controlled by Damien and Diane. The total glowed in red at the bottom, $47 million. Someone in the crowd shouted a question I couldn't quite hear. Above the growing noise, the sound of 500 people trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they had believed 20 minutes ago. But I didn't need to hear it. The LED wall was telling the story better than I ever could. The fourth slide appeared. Toxicology reports from Nevada Forensic Laboratory. My blood samples analyzed by technicians who didn't know my name. 2 compounds highlighted in yellow, MPTP metabolites and cyanide derivatives. Concentrations measured in micrograms per liter. Dates spanning 18 months. Poison. In my body. In my blood. In every cell that had been dying slowly while they watched. I set the microphone down and gestured to the side entrance. Vincent opened the door and Crystal Hayes walked into the grand ballroom. She wore a navy dress that couldn't hide her condition. 7 months pregnant, moving with the careful balance of a woman carrying new life. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked terrified and determined in equal measure. I handed her the microphone. My name is Crystal Hayes, she said. Her voice shook, but she pushed through. I'm a medical assistant at Carson Medical Clinic. I've been Damien Brennan's mistress for 2 years. The ballroom went silent. Not the polite quiet of an attentive audience, but the shocked hush of a crowd that had stopped breathing. After Serena showed me the toxicology report in the hospital, I started remembering things I had pushed down. Things Damien had said. Conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. I found documents on his phone in March wire transfers, account numbers, a name I didn't recognize, Shaw Brennan Capital. I didn't understand what any of it meant. But I kept screenshots. I kept everything, because some part of me knew that one day I would need to be believed. Crystal's hands trembled around the microphone. I stood beside her close enough to catch her, if she fell far enough to let her tell the truth in her own words. In the documents I found there were timelines, 18 months, notes about cognitive decline targets, numbers that matched wire transfers moving out of accounts Damien controlled. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough to know what they were planning and who they were planning it against. I glanced at Damien. He sat frozen at the head table, his face a mask of horror and calculation. Diane had gone rigid beside him, her emerald dress brilliant against the white tablecloth. I didn't say anything, Crystal continued. I was afraid. Damien had promised he would leave Serena, that we would be together, that this baby would have a father. I believed him. I stayed quiet while they poisoned her. She was 7 months pregnant, with his child. 2 weeks ago, Damien told me he was done, that I was a mistake, that if I told anyone about us, he would make sure I lost everything. Crystal's voice hardened. So I called Vincent Pike, and I told him everything. She handed the microphone back to me. Our eyes met for one brief moment, and I saw something like apology in her expression. I nodded. We were both women who had loved Damien Brennan and learned too late what that love cost. Crystal stepped back. Vincent escorted her to a seat near the emergency exit away from the crowd. I turned to face the ballroom. 500 people stared back at me. At table 1, Diane Shaw rose slowly to her feet. Her emerald dress caught the light as she straightened her shoulders. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Not running, not stumbling, walking with perfect posture and perfect control, as if she were simply leaving early, as if the walls weren't closing in, as if her entire world hadn't just collapsed in front of everyone who mattered. I watched her go, and I smiled. She made it 7 steps before the medical board blocked her path. Diane Shaw, in her emerald dress with perfect posture, froze 3 meters from the exit. 2 investigators in dark suits stepped into her trajectory, with the bureaucratic efficiency of people who had ended careers before. The taller one, gray-haired, expressionless, pulled a document from his jacket. Dr. Diane Shaw, you are hereby served with interim suspension of your California medical license under Business and Professions Code, Section 2220. Diane's face shifted. Fury to shock to ash-white horror in 3 seconds. You can't, she whispered. The notice is effective immediately, the investigator continued. Gross negligence and unprofessional conduct. A disciplinary hearing will be scheduled within 90 days. I watched from the stage as understanding washed over her. The medical board investigators had been positioned at that exit since before my speech began. Vincent had coordinated with state regulators and federal agents, closing every escape route she might attempt. Diane took the document with trembling hands. Her medical license, built over 15 years, ended in front of 500 witnesses, while cameras still rolled. She looked at me. Our eyes met across 30 meters. I saw hatred there, and fear, and something that might have been betrayal, as if I had broken some unspoken rule by refusing to die quietly. I looked back and felt nothing at all. Agent Cross walked onto the stage. He moved past me with a brief nod, then stopped in front of Damien, who still stood frozen at the podium. Damien Brennan. Agent Cross said, his voice formal and clear. You are under arrest for wire fraud under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Damien stared at him, his mouth opened. No sound came out. 2 FBI agents materialized behind him. One pulled Damien's arms back and secured handcuffs around his wrists. The metallic click echoed through the silent ballroom. Damien turned his head, searching the crowd. His eyes found his mother. Mom. His voice cracked on the single syllable. Desperate, pleading. Helen Brennan stood beside me at the stage edge. She wore her gray suit, her silver hair pulled back, her expression carved from stone. She looked at her son, her only child, raised to understand justice and integrity, and her face did not change. I can't help you, she said quietly. Those 4 words landed like a gavel strike. Final. Irreversible. The agents led Damien down the stage stairs. His legs barely worked. He stumbled on the 3rd step, and they steadied him with impersonal professionalism. The crowd parted as they walked him toward the service exit. At the main exit, 2 more FBI agents flanked Diane. They cuffed her hands behind her back. Her emerald dress wrinkled as she struggled for 1 futile second before surrendering. Helen did not cry. Neither did I. We just stood there watching. The ballroom emptied slowly. Guests filed out in shocked silence. Phones already raised messages, already flying to news outlets and social media. The networks packed their equipment. The catering staff collected abandoned champagne glasses from tables where millions of dollars sat in uncomfortable proximity to federal crimes. By 10:45 p.m., the grand ballroom was empty. Vincent found us backstage in the corridor where performers usually waited before walking into spotlights. He carried a thermos and 3 paper cups. Coffee, he said, pouring. Real coffee, not hotel sludge. I took the cup. The ceramic burned my palms through the thin paper. I welcomed the pain. It was real and immediate, and something I could feel besides the hollowness spreading through my chest. Helen accepted hers without speaking. We sat on folding chairs meant for musicians, three people who had just destroyed two lives and saved one drinking coffee that tasted like ashes. No one spoke for 5 minutes. Then Helen set her cup down. I sentenced 214 people over 31 years, she said. Her voice was steady, measured, the same tone she had used from the bench when handing down verdicts. I never calculated one would carry my genetic code. I looked at her. At this woman who had chosen to destroy her son so I could live, who had given me evidence and counsel and the unflinching support of someone who understood that justice did not bend for blood. You chose justice over blood, I said. That takes more courage than I had. You both had enough. Vincent refilled our cups. The coffee steamed in the cool corridor. Down the hall, hotel staff moved with quiet efficiency, resetting the ballroom for tomorrow's event. Life continued. The world did not pause for private devastations. Helen wrapped both hands around her cup. He was 6 when he asked me what my job meant, she said. I told him judges decide what is true and false, what is right and wrong. He looked at me and said that sounded like the hardest job in the world. She paused. I agreed with him. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the grief carved into her face. But what do you say to the woman who chose to destroy her son so you could live? He made his choices, I said finally. You made yours. Yes. Helen's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Yes, he did. We sat in the corridor drinking Vincent's coffee until the thermos ran dry. The grief was not triumphant. It was not victorious. It was the devastated mourning of people who understood that what we had lost, the marriage, the friendship, the trust that had existed before the poisoning ever began, could never be recovered. Damien and Diane had not destroyed those things tonight. They had destroyed them 18 months ago, dose by dose, lie by lie. Tonight we had simply made the destruction visible. Vincent refilled our cups one more time and said the federal sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 months out, first week of November. 3 months to watch the legal machinery process the two people who had tried to erase me from existence. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt tired and free. But the story was not over until the judge spoke. The judge did not hesitate when she read the numbers. 14 months had passed since the Beverly Hilton ballroom went silent. 14 months of federal prosecutors building their case of grand jury proceedings, of discovery motions and plea negotiations grinding toward this moment. Both defendants had entered guilty pleas in exchange for reduced charges, a decision their attorneys made when faced with the weight of evidence assembled against them. October of the following year arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I sat in the U.S. District Court gallery watching justice finally measure itself in years. Judge Margaret Reeves was a 62-year-old federal judge with silver hair and the measured tone of someone who had sentenced enough monsters to recognize 2 more. She looked at Damien across the courtroom, then at Diane, then down at the sentencing documents before her. Mr. Brennan, she said, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. You are hereby sentenced to 15 years in federal custody for conspiracy to commit murder wire fraud under Title 18, Section 1343, and poisoning under California Penal Code Section 347. Damien stood beside his public defender. His suit was wrinkled. His face had gone hollow during 3 months of pre-trial detention. He looked like a man who had already begun serving his sentence. Judge Reeves turned to Diane. Dr. Shaw, you are hereby sentenced to 22 years in federal custody for the same charges with additional counts of money laundering. The Medical Board of California has permanently revoked your medical license under Business and Professions Code, Section 2236, following their disciplinary review. 22 years. 7 more than Damien. The court had recognized what I had always known: Diane was not the accomplice. She was the architect. She had weaponized her medical authority, her access to controlled substances, her knowledge of human physiology to create 18 months of calculated destruction. Diane's face remained expressionless. Her attorney touched her elbow. She did not move. Damien turned his head, searching the gallery. His eyes found mine. "Serena," he whispered. I looked at him. At this man I had married, had loved, had trusted with every vulnerable part of myself. At the stranger who had watched me deteriorate and calculated how long until he could file conservatorship papers. There is nothing left to say to a ghost. I looked away. The bailiffs led them out through separate doors. Damien stumbled on the courtroom threshold. Diane walked with her spine straight, her chin up, still performing composure even as the walls closed in. Helen sat 3 rows behind me. She had not spoken during the hearing. She had simply sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the Great Seal of the United States mounted behind the judge's bench. When the courtroom emptied, she stood and walked out without looking back. 15 years, 22 years. Numbers that meant nothing and everything. I left the courthouse and drove home alone. The Santa Monica air smelled like salt and eucalyptus. Life continued. The world had not paused. 6 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a text from Crystal. "He arrived healthy. Named him after my grandfather. Thank you for the referrals." I stared at the message for 5 minutes before responding. "Congratulations. Would you accept a visitor?" She sent the hospital name and room number. LA County Hospital maternity ward smelled like antiseptic and new life. I found Crystal in room 4B, sitting in the adjustable bed with a bundle of blue blanket cradled against her chest. She looked exhausted and radiant in equal measure. She saw me in the doorway and her expression shifted. Surprise, wariness, something that might have been shame. "You came," she said. I did. I walked to the bedside and looked at the infant sleeping against her chest. He had dark hair and tiny fists curled beneath his chin. He was innocent. He was blameless. He carried none of the sins of his father. "He's beautiful, Ahamin," I said. Crystal looked down at her son, then back at me. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "After everything he did." I pulled the visitor chair closer to the bed and sat down. "You were broken by those with the duty to protect you," I said. "There is an absolute difference." Crystal's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back. "I should have told someone sooner. I should have—" "You did tell someone, why?" I said. "When it mattered, you spoke. That took courage." She looked at her son again. The baby stirred, made a small sound, settled back into sleep. "What do I tell him?" she asked. "When he's old enough to ask about his father, tell him the truth," I said. "That his father made terrible choices. That those choices had consequences. That he is not defined by where he came from, only by what he chooses to become." Crystal nodded slowly. We sat in silence for a moment. The hospital sounds filtered through the closed door, nurses moving in the corridor, monitors, beeping, the soft murmur of other families welcoming new lives into an uncertain world. I reached into my purse and pulled out a cream envelope. I set it on the bedside table. "What's this?" Crystal asked. "A trust fund," I said. "Blind administration. It will cover his full education through university tuition, books, housing expenses. He'll never know it came from me unless you choose to tell him." Crystal stared at the envelope. Her hands tightened around her baby. "I don't understand why you would—" "Because he's innocent," I said. "Because what do you owe the child of the man who tried to erase you? You owe him the chance his father tried to steal from everyone else. You owe him the possibility of becoming something better." Crystal's tears spilled over. She reached out with one hand and touched mine. "Thank you," she whispered. I squeezed her hand gently, then stood. "Take care of him," I said. "Take care of yourself." I left the hospital and drove to the office for the first time in 6 weeks. The building looked the same, glass and steel, and the Voss Lumiere logo backlit against the November sky. I had a company to rebuild and a life to reclaim. But first I needed to see Helen one more time. There was one last conversation between a mother and the woman her son tried to kill. Helen was cutting dead roses when I arrived, her hands steady despite everything her son had done. I had driven to Pasadena unannounced on a Sunday morning in early December. The house looked the same, from the street white colonial with black shutters, the kind of architecture that suggested stability, and old money, and families that survived across generations. The rose garden wrapped around the east side, catching the morning sun. Helen stood among the bushes with pruning shears, removing spent blooms with the methodical precision of someone who understood that cutting away the dead was necessary for new growth. She wore gardening gloves and a canvas apron. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple bun. She looked up when my footsteps crunched on the gravel path. "I hoped you would come," she said. She set down the shears and pulled off her gloves. We walked to the garden bench beneath the pergola where wisteria would bloom in spring. She poured tea from a thermos that had been waiting on the wrought iron table, 2 cups, as if she had known I would arrive. The tea was Earl Grey. It tasted like bergamot and smoke. "I visited him last week," Helen said. Her voice was quiet, measured. "First time since the sentencing." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup and waited. He wept when I visited. First tears I have seen from him since he was 7 years old. She stared at the roses, at the careful rows of hybrid teas and floribundas that she had tended for 30 years. "What did he say?" I asked. "That he was sorry. That he did not understand how it happened. That he woke up one day and realized he had become someone he did not recognize." She paused. The usual script of men who destroy everything and claim surprise at the wreckage. I sipped my tea. The bergamot burned the back of my throat. "His childhood bedroom is on the 2nd floor," Helen continued. "I shuttered the windows last month. I cannot walk past it anymore." She set her cup down with careful precision. "I am selling this house," she said. "Moving downtown closer to your offices. There is a building on Grand Avenue with good light and a doorman who minds his own business." I looked at her. At this woman who had chosen justice over blood, who had handed me the evidence that destroyed her only child, who was now dismantling the life she had built because the architecture no longer fit. "You do not have to do that," I said. "I know." Helen's voice was steady. "But some relationships outlast the people who created them. Damien gave me a daughter-in-law. The fact that he tried to kill you does not erase what you and I built in the margins of his betrayal. She chose me. The mother of my poisoner chose me." We sat in silence for 5 minutes. The roses swayed in the December breeze. Somewhere down the street a dog barked. Life continued its ordinary rhythms while we rearranged the wreckage. "Will you visit him again?" I asked finally. "Once a year," Helen said. "On his birthday. To remind him that I still exist and that consequences persist." I finished my tea. Helen refilled both our cups without asking. "And you?" she asked. "Will you see him?" "Once," I said, "to close the door properly." 2 weeks later, in late December, I drove 2 hours northeast to Federal Correctional Institution, Victorville. The desert stretched flat and hostile on both sides of the highway. The prison rose from the sand like a monument to bad choices. Damien sat across from me in the visitor room with bulletproof glass between us. He had aged a decade in 5 months. Silver streaked through his dark hair. His face had gone gaunt. He wore the khaki uniform of federal inmates and the defensive posture of someone who had learned that survival required vigilance. He picked up the phone. I picked up mine. "You came," he said. "Once," I replied. We stared at each other through the scratched glass. I tried to find the man I had married in the hollow-eyed stranger before me. The man who had quoted poetry over morning coffee. The man who had danced with me in the kitchen while dinner burned. The man who had promised forever and meant 18 months. "Was there ever one authentic moment?" Damien asked. His voice cracked on the word authentic. "Between us." I could have lied. I could have told him it was all performance, all calculation, that I had never loved him at all. It would have been kinder, but I had promised myself I would never lie again. "There were multiple," I said. "That is what made it easy for you to dismantle them." Damien closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I am sorry," he said. "I know that means nothing, but I need you to know. An apology possesses zero capacity to reconstruct an empire you burned down." I said, My voice was calm, clinical. The voice I used when formulating compounds in the lab when precision mattered more than emotion. You were sorry when you watched me collapse at the October board meeting. You were sorry when you planned the conservatorship filing. You were sorry every time Diane prepared another dose, and you said nothing. What do you say to the man who tried to erase you when he asks if any of it was real? You tell him the truth. You tell him that authenticity does not absolve destruction. You tell him that love is not a defense against murder. Damien pressed his palm against the glass. I looked at his hand, the hand that had held mine, that had signed our marriage license, that had accepted 18 months of silence while poison accumulated in my blood. I did not raise my hand to meet his. Goodbye, Damien, I said. I hung up the phone and stood. Behind the glass, I saw his mouth form my name. I turned and walked toward the exit without looking back. The guard buzzed me through 3 security doors. The December sun hit my face when I stepped outside. The air smelled like desert sage and diesel fuel. I drove home from Victorville in silence. No radio, no phone calls, just 2 hours of desert highway, and the certainty that I would never see Damien Brennan again. The landscape blurred past. Joshua trees stood sentinel against the winter sky. When I reached the city limits, I realized the silence was not grief. It was peace. Now I could finally begin again. I made my own coffee on a Monday morning in late December, and it was the first time in 2 years I had not watched someone else measure the water. The executive suite at Voss Lumiere headquarters looked the same as it had before the poisoning began. Floor-to-ceiling windows facing west toward the Pacific. Danish furniture in pale wood and cream leather. The espresso machine I had installed 3 years ago, when I still believed my husband's interest in my morning routine was affection rather than reconnaissance. I filled the reservoir myself, selected the beans myself, watched the dark stream pour into the white ceramic cup without calculating whether anyone had tampered with the grounds or the water or the machine itself. Black coffee, self-made, nobody counting milliliters. The first sip burned my tongue. I welcomed it. Pain that came from impatience rather than malice was a gift I had forgotten to appreciate. The operational report sat on my desk in neat stacks, corporate documents with Damien's name permanently removed, replaced with my signature alone on every page that mattered. Awakening had shattered UK pre-order projections by 340%. The Tokyo waiting list exceeded 12,000 customers. 3 major department store chains were negotiating exclusive distribution rights for spring 2025. The city did not change. I did. By afternoon, I stood in the 22nd floor lab with the door closed and the ventilation system humming. I had spent 18 months unable to work in this room, my hands too unstable to measure compounds, my mind too fractured to trust my own instincts. Now I stood at the formulation table with 12 sample vials arranged in a semicircle, working on a new scent with no commercial name, no marketing brief, no distributor waiting. Just raw, creative instinct, the kind I had possessed at 18 in grass, before anyone had tried to take it from me. You spend 18 months being poisoned, and you forget what it feels like to create something without fear. By evening, I stood on my terrace with a glass of Bordeaux I had poured myself, watching Los Angeles transform in the failing light. I pulled the awakening sample from my pocket and tested it on my wrist. Bergamot, clarity of resolve when the world insists you are losing your mind. Patchouli roots that cannot be stripped away, no matter how deeply the poison penetrates. Cedarwood after rain, the scent of being washed clean, but remaining upright, scarred but unbroken, transformed but fundamentally yourself. Awakening was not a perfume. It was a map of every step I took to stay alive. My father had taught me to trust my circle. But standing alone on this terrace with a city glittering below and my empire rebuilt around me, I understood something he had never needed to say aloud, that the most important relationship you will ever maintain is the one with yourself when everyone else has failed you. I was not lonely. I was alone. and I had spent the last 8 months learning exactly what that difference feels like. Lonely is isolation imposed by loss. Alone is sovereignty claimed by choice. I had chosen this, chosen to survive, chosen to expose the two people who tried to erase me, chosen to rebuild my company, my life, and my trust in my own instincts. Chosen to stand on this terrace at 29 years old, sole owner of a $200 million empire, and not be afraid of the silence. The sun dropped below the horizon. The bergamot on my wrist opened bright and unafraid. The patchouli held steady underneath. The cedarwood finished clean. This is where the story ends and where mine begins. And to you listening to my story, remember this. The people closest to you can be the most dangerous because you've given them the keys to every door. Don't make my mistake. I ignored the signs because I couldn't imagine the man who brought me coffee, or the best friend who held my hand through grief, could be capable of such cruelty. I confused routine with love, proximity with loyalty. I trusted blindly when I should have trusted carefully. By the time I understood, 18 months of my life had been stolen. The lesson I learned is this: betrayal doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly in the dailynesses you stop questioning. Trust is precious, but it should never make you naive. Watch for patterns that don't align, concern that feels rehearsed, care that comes with conditions. I believe God allowed me to survive this poisoning for a reason, to tell you that you're not crazy when your instincts whisper warnings. Your body knows when something is wrong. Your intuition is not paranoia. Listen to it. Trust yourself first, even when everyone says you're imagining things. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you experienced betrayal from someone you trusted? How did you rebuild? Leave a comment and share your story. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Her Drama Stories for more stories of survival strength and the truth about trust. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time matters, and I hope this story leaves you stronger. A final note. This story contains fictional elements for storytelling, but the lessons about betrayal, poisoning, and survival are real. May you recognize the signs if you need them.